Good evening. We have two meetings tonight. The first is a special meeting of the Urbana City Council, and that will be followed by the Council's Committee of the Whole. Okay, I'd like to call this meeting to order. Would the clerk please call the roll?
Ms. Barnes?
Here.
Mr. Bowersox?
Here.
Ms. Chenoweth? Mr. Lewis?
Here.
Mr. Roberts?
Here.
Mr. Smythe? Here. Ms. Stevenson?
Present.
Mayor Pressing?
Here. And the first item is petitions and communications. And in view of our topics on the agendas tonight, I would like to ask you all to please turn off your cell phones. Is there anyone who would like to address delayed laughter? Okay. Is there anyone who would like to address the Urbana City Council? No one wants to address the Urbana City Council? Okay, we'll move on. I would like to say that we should, I'd like to change the order here. On number 4, that ordinance really should go after what's listed on the agenda for 8 and 9, because they're all related. So let's make that change. And we'll move on to ordinance number 2008-03-014, an ordinance vacating a portion of Park Street between Lincoln Avenue and Busey Avenue.
And Mayor, since this relates to Carl, I'll be recusing myself.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, is this Public Works going to talk about this? The vacation? Or maybe it's just, does it come from the...
committee.
Okay, well, it's not listed as, it's coming from the Committee of the Whole, so Brandon Bowersox will introduce that.
Yeah, the Committee of the Whole met 2 weeks ago, I think it was on the 10th, and sent this item to Council for approval. So on behalf of the committee, I move approval.
Second.
Okay, motion by Mr. Bowersox and second by Stevenson. Is there any... Are there any questions or comments? If not, would the clerk please call the roll?
Mr. Bowersox?
Yes.
Ms. Chenoweth?
Yes.
Mr. Lewis?
Yes.
Mr. Roberts?
Yes.
Mr. Smythe?
Yes.
Ms. Stevenson?
Yes.
Okay, the motion carries. Next, ordinance number 2008-03-016, an ordinance approving and causing publication of the official zoning map of the city of Urbana. Did that come from the Committee of the Whole?
No, that's new.
Okay. So is there any discussion on this? Paul Lindahl?
I can just briefly go through the highlights, if you'd like. The Planning Commission voted on March 6, 2008 at their meeting, 6-0, to forward the map to the City Council with a recommendation for approval. The copy they saw was a draft. The copy that you have also seen is a draft, and we've been continuing to go over it for quality control. In the past year, we've had 1 annexation and 2 rezonings, 12 subdivisions. 2 properties were designated as historic landmarks, and 1 area of 14 properties was designated as a historic district. And staff recommends approval of the map.
Okay, is there a motion?
Move adoption of the map.
Second. Yeah.
Motion by Mr. Smythe, seconded by Mr. Lewis. Any other discussion? Mr. Bowersox?
I just wanted to ask if these are motions to send them to the April 7 council meeting for approval. Is that the order that we'll do these in? Or no, I'm sorry. This is council. This came here. We're done. Great. Okay.
Mr. Roberts?
I noticed on the map, and I guess I have a question for Paul, and this happens to be because I've been paying attention to the Victory Park area. If you look on East Main Street, the green area, which is indicated as being parks and recreational, doesn't actually extend to and touch Main Street. Instead, it's interfered with by zoning, which is, I think, R4 or R5, the army green color. And in all practical purposes, There are no apartments along Main Street, East Main Street at that location, so it seems like the zoning map, it has to be updated perhaps a little farther than it has. It's an inconsistency that doesn't seem to be correct.
Okay. First of all, I will have to look into the history of Victory Park to find out if it does go all the way up to the edge there. Now that you mention it, I'm thinking that it might.
I think it would have to because there's public park equipment on that site for a very long time.
Yeah. Well, I guess the only thing I can say is I'll have to research it.
Yeah.
Because after the zoning, represents what the projected land use is. It doesn't always exactly correlate with what's actually going on there. And I think that would address your second concern regarding the zoning of some of the property along there that's zoned R4. And you're correct. There aren't a lot of apartments in the area.
Yeah.
A lot of it is single family and other.
So I don't know if it's an oversight or just something that has never been addressed by a zoning change. Okay,
I can help on that.
you can. Okay. Enlighten me then.
Well, the zoning map that you have before you just reflects what the actual zoning is, and it doesn't reflect what the land use is, just strictly what the zoning is. And actually, the area you're referring to is part of our East Urbana study for rezoning, and those are one of the parcels that we're actually proposing to rezone to better reflect what the land use is, which is the park. And we've notified the park district that we're doing this study, and we've asked for their input, and they've indicated that my recollection is they've indicated that they would be fine with that being rezoned to CRE zoning, which is conservation, recreation, education.
All right. Okay. Great, thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions? If not, would the clerk please call the roll?
Ms. Barnes?
Yes?
Mr. Bowersox?
Yes.
Ms. Shanaway?
Yes.
Mr. Lewis?
Yes.
Mr. Roberts?
Yes.
Mr. Smythe?
Yes.
Ms. Stevenson?
That motion carries. Next is ordinance number 2008-03-017, an ordinance approving a major variance to allow an electronic message board LED sign to increase the frequency of message changes from once per 3 minutes to once per 10 seconds at the southeast corner of Windsor Road and Philo Road in the B3 General Business Zoning District at 2710 South Philo Road.
Okay.
Mr. Lindahl.
Okay. I'd like to take this just along with 2008 Major 2, which would allow the sign to be multicolored. The petitioners requested these both together, and they consider them both together. Again, while it's a request for two different variances, both are necessary to install the sign as designed. The Zoning Board of Appeals recommended approval at their March 12th meeting of both major variances by a vote of 6-0. The purpose here is to provide the businesses of the Pines visibility to Windsor and South Philo Road without creating an oversized shopping center sign. And it would allow the tenants in each of the locations to I'm trying not to laugh. It would allow the tenants
I'm
in
not
each...
distracting you, I hope.
No, actually, we have the petitioners have a movie to show us what the 10 seconds are, so you'll be able to see that. In any case, the intent here is to create a shopping center sign structure that does not have proliferation of individual freestanding tenant signs. And it would allow the overall size of the sign to be smaller while still allowing display of each of the tenants' names and logos. It is possible to have a 30-foot tall sign at this location, and the petitioners are proposing one that is only 16 feet tall. In addition, the multi-color display is now common in many parts of the country, and given the increasing availability of affordable LEDs, we could probably expect to see it more often. The petitioners are stating that the LED sign minimum delay of 10 seconds would allow sufficient viewing time for multiple tenants to be represented when a driver is either driving by or sitting at the light. They might experience only 2 or 3 tenant representations. Without reading all the summary of findings, I'd just point out, also regarding the Zoning Board of Appeals, they asked staff to communicate to the council that they felt that some text changes in the zoning ordinance should be considered to meet the likelihood of additional requests for LED signs. And the council has the options in this case to approve the major variances, subject to some changes, or deny the proposed variances. And staff recommends, and the Zoning Board of Appeals has recommended approval of both of these major variances. If you have questions for me, I can answer them. We also have a representative of the petitioners here with us today.
Any questions? Lynn Barnes.
I don't have a question. I was just going to move approval.
Okay, motion by Ms. Barnes, seconded by Ms. Stevenson. Any discussion? Mr. Bowersox.
Well, I do have a number of questions, but I guess I did want to hear from the petitioner and see their video and kind of hear that presentation at this point, if that's appropriate.
Okay, would you like to make your presentation? You want to introduce yourself?
Oh, and the microphone is the little black thing. Yeah, there it is. If you kind of talk towards that, everybody will be able to hear you.
Thank you. Good evening, Council. My name is Jenny Park with Meyer Capel. I'm the attorney for the Atkins Group, and this is Jane Solon from the Atkins Group. And we're here to answer any questions. We're also here to show you a presentation of exactly what the sign will look like and the time in which the sign will move.
This is an example of the tenants' names and some of the community events that would be on the sign, and it's timed for every 10 seconds that it would change if it starts.
I can see it here.
It's from the last of it.
Yeah.
Okay, that was the last of it.
Mr. Roberts.
Can you explain, we were given a diagram of the proposed sign. It's a monument sign, and it looked like the changing billboard would be near the top. But there was also a, if I can remember correctly, there was a logo of the, or the name of the Pines was next to it. Is that also part of the display that changes?
No, that would stay the Pines. That would be out of, it would be a routed out sign that would be backlit, that would light up at night, and during the day it would just...
So it would be adjacent to a panel that's going to be changing, you're proposing every 10 seconds?
The panel would be on top of it.
Right.
Yes.
Yeah.
Right.
Right.
So the only part that will be moving is that 40 by 96.
Oh, you're saying, all right.
Yeah.
So you're saying this entire thing is moving, not just that part of it?
No, where the pine says stays,
This whole panel is going to
yes,
be a display area?
that's what's going to be
Okay, all right.
similar to what you saw on the screen.
All right. All right. Okay. Now, up until now, the city has had a sign regulation that has allowed some display elements, but there's a limitation on the time span. It's about, 300% longer, 3 minutes rather than 10 seconds, and single color display. What is your argument for needing color display changing so quickly?
The need for color has to do with trademarks and logos that are very important to retail tenants. So many companies are now known by colors that are associated with them. If you saw a white Dunkin' Donuts, it wouldn't have the same impact as seeing the brown and the pink colors and the orange that go with Dunkin' Donuts, or the same with Starbucks, the Target, the red Target logo, the colors for Subway, the green and yellow. There are just colors that are synonymous with retail tenants, and many national tenants, unless you give them their signage with their colors, they don't want to be in your development.
Isn't it true, though, that appropriately colored logo-bearing signage would be available on the buildings themselves, on the marquees of the buildings?
It would, but the way that our development is designed, which is different than any other development in Champaign-Urbana, is to make it more of a community neighborhood center. The buildings are set in off the street, so it's not real visible, their names above it. We've created plazas, a boulevard where people can walk and ride their bikes, where people can gather, and we want this to be a community place. And for many retail tenants, having their names back off the street where the vehicular traffic will not see them is a deterrent for them being in our development.
Mm-hmm. Are you familiar with this sign, which is in front near our building at Lincoln Square Village? Typically, this type of monumental signage has been acceptable, but you're saying that because of the sophistication of this project, this would no longer be considered the type of signage that you're interested in?
Correct. By those signs, you could list every tenant's name. As tenants come and go, the panels become faded, change colors. They become kind of, aesthetically not very pleasing. With an electronic message board, you're simply with the computer changing the names of the tenants so you don't get the faded and the different colored panels, and it remains aesthetically pleasing to the passerbys.
With the rapid change, the technology that's changing in the sign business, more and more signs are becoming not only billboards but almost like television sets. Many people, when they go to a bar, are, I wouldn't say they're accosted, but they're presented with multiple television sets going at the same time. And it's my opinion that when you're talking to a friend across the table from you, maybe because we're part of the television generation, one's eye immediately travels over to the motion on the television set. Do you think it's going to be safe? I guess I have this question for the whole entire council, actually. Where is it? At what point does the need to have commercial marketing flicking at a higher rate of speed for efficiency of marketing purposes become a detriment to motorists traveling on the highway, whose eyes naturally will be drawn to a more quickly changing display? We're talking tonight also about distracted drivers. this is a rather big issue right now in this town, I have a concern that a colored display that's rapidly changing every 3 seconds will become 10 seconds, will be a distraction on the highway.
Well, the Federal Transportation Department has done studies on this, and they have found that 8 to 10 seconds are acceptable. IDOT has adopted 10 seconds on the highway, and those are cars that are traveling, 60 to 65. So if a car is only traveling 35 miles an hour, you would probably assume that it would be less likely to cause an accident because they're not, and so there have been studies done that say that it's safe.
Okay, thank you.
Lynn Barnes?
Just a couple comments. I'm personally very pleased with the looks of this sign as compared to the sign that's out in front of Lincoln Square. I think it's much more appealing, much more attractive. It really adds to our community. I think as far as 10 seconds, there's some personal responsibility that plays into there. You can be distracted by anything, a dog in a yard, all kinds of things happening when you're driving. And it's the personal responsibility, I believe, of the driver to maintain safety in their vehicle at all times. I think this is a lovely sign, and I think from a business perspective, I certainly understand why Monocle's, Milo's, those companies would like their logo out front. You're right. You developed and designed a very lovely set of properties there, but they don't have that frontage. And so this gives them that chance to get their signage out there at that key location of that crossroads between Windsor and Philo.
Danielle Chenoweth.
I have a couple of questions for the petitioner and also for staff. Maybe I'll start with a few questions with the petitioner and then move to staff. The first question I have is, is it, and I'm sorry if I missed this, I was looking up something as Dennis was speaking at the beginning. Is it 10 feet by 4 feet, 4 inches like your presentation, or is it 26.7 square feet? What size is the electronic billboard planned to be at?
It's actually the 40 inches by the 96 inches.
40 inches by 96 inches, which is that the 10 foot by 4 foot 4 inches in the presentation? I'm sorry, I can't do the math in my head.
Well, it's a little less than that.
4 by 8.
It'd be 3.5 by.
That would be equal to what it says.
Okay, so it's the 26 by 0.7 square feet that you were discussing. Okay. The second are there plans for the sign to, like, sometimes you see signs and the image emerges and it disappears or it bounces around, like the assembly hall, there's movement and then it stops.
The way the variance is written, we're not allowed to have animated or flashing.
Okay, so it would be a still,
It would
and
be-
then it would...
It would be exactly what you saw on the screen.
Okay, and then a couple of questions for staff, which is it, in looking at this, it's not really a variance, actually. It's kind of it's somewhat a change of policy, and I know that sometimes things come before us and we're pushing the variance so far that it ends up being policy. I guess my question is, if we say yes to this, and I like the aesthetics of the sign, but I'm thinking about the precedent that it's setting in the long term. If we say yes to this, is it the case that by default, anyone else who comes to us with the same terms up to the full size of the sign would be basically eligible to have an electronic sign? I mean, we're basically setting precedent, and we're setting precedent up to the full size of our ordinance, correct?
I'm not sure exactly how I'd answer that, except that my understanding of one of our previous city attorneys is that a variance is, in each and every case, a distinct event. There really isn't such thing as a precedent that allows the next one to make the same argument. If another case came forward that had similar kind of compelling rationale, and they could meet each of the variance criteria in a very similar manner, then they would be eligible. But I wouldn't say it's a change in policy in the same way that you said.
Okay.
That would, if you would wish to change the policy, then we could have a text amendment.
Okay. I guess I was looking at, we're obligated to look at what is a variance. And so I look at number 1 under page 4 of, are there special circumstances? And it seems like there aren't really special circumstances with the exception of the distance. That's the circumstance that seems special to me, is the distance of the businesses from the corner, whereas 3-minute not giving enough time isn't a special circumstance, and the importance of trademarked color logos, which as a marketing person I understand, but that's not necessarily a special circumstance. That's going to be the case with all signs. So it's a question really, which is it the case that if we say yes to this with this criteria, then basically we can't hold the 3-minute image or the color restriction in the future because we've listed those as under number 1.
I think maybe Robert will have to answer that
Okay.
one.
I hope I'm making sense here, but
Yeah.
Robert Myers?
Sure. As was just said, you have to take each on a case-by-case basis. In this situation, there are 2 circumstances I think probably should be noted. One is the unusual layout of the building, so that they don't, rather than doing a typical strip commercial center where each business has frontage along the street and they have a sign that you could see from the roadway. This is more internally oriented, sort of like a shopping mall, if you want to call it that, where the pedestrians walk around a central area. The other thing is that they're asking this in lieu of the normally allowed 4 shopping center signs. They could have 4 shopping center signs, 2 along each frontage, and instead they want to do 1. And they want to make so that the 1 shopping center sign will be sufficient for all of their signage needs. They're asking not to do that in a way where it's a scrolling animated message or a movement. They're asking for a static image as allowed by the ordinance, but instead of a static image every 3 minutes, every 10 seconds. So the other thing I think is, in my mind, that's significant is that they're asking for this in lieu of the normally allowed 4 shopping center signs, 2 on each frontage.
And so just that's a good point. And so in terms of legal precedent that can be, upheld in court in a situation, there's circumstances of this project which say we're going from 4 signs to 1 sign. And if someone were to come in the future and want the same thing and not be reducing signage, that wouldn't be, we would have a case to say no to that, to say 4 electronic signs, because the situation between this case and those cases that are being requested is different.
I believe so. Yeah, what they're requesting is essentially to limit themselves to 1/4 of the otherwise allowed signage, but to do in a way that the message changes sufficiently where they can get their tenants' messages
Okay.
on the sign.
My last question is, are ads prohibited in business signage in our ordinance?
No. There's obviously there's constitutional limits on what you can prohibit in terms of free speech. If signage is allowed, essentially the sign can say anything that the
Okay.
owner wants to within certain limitations. But for instance, if someone is allowed, Walmart, let's just say, they could put up their Walmart sign. It wouldn't have to say Walmart. It could say, Go Illini. It could say whatever, essentially what they wanted it to say. And it's the same here. If you have a electronic message board, you could have milk $2.49, Monica's Pizza, Go Illini, or whatever message that it happens to be.
And just to go back to what I was talking about before, would the case be compromised if we were to approve it, striking most of what's under number 1, where we say the special circumstance is, we left that last sentence, but the first 2 sentences we struck? And, this might not be something that you can answer right now, but it is a question that I have in terms of I'm always we should always be looking at signage and other things, not based on the very specific circumstance in front of us, but the legal precedent that we're setting in the future and what kind of precedent we're opening up for the future. So something can be very tastefully done today, and we're opening up precedent for things that are not tastefully done in the future, and that's kind of my concern in moving forward with this.
You're referring to page 2 of the ordinance? in the last-
Yeah. It's the section where we talk about what the special circumstances are. Page.
I think she means
looking
variance
at-
criteria number 1.
Okay.
Yes, yes.
Oh, and you're thinking about the last line, the special circumstances that the design aesthetic of the Pines would be undermined if a large conventional shopping center sign or multiple individual signs were installed, showing each tenant's name and logo.
Yeah, I was actually referring to the memo. I'm not sure how it translates to the
Okay.
ordinance. It's just number 1 under the special circumstances on page 4 of the memo.
Ah, okay. It's the same wording in both the ordinance and the memo.
Well, Charlie just asked why I wouldn't want to have that wording, because it basically says anyone can now say that their special circumstance is that 3 minutes isn't long enough for people to read, and can say that monochromatic doesn't allow for trademarked color logos. And I think that doesn't allow us to look at some things on a case-by-case basis that I think we're talking about wanting to be able to do in the future. So I guess I'm asking the question, this is a planning question.
Right.
If we were to strike those special circumstances and to say it's the design aesthetic of the Pines, and we could also say the visibility, which I guess is mentioned in number 2, but the setback of all, it's basically the terrain of that corner that makes it difficult for signage to be seen in other manners, and that's the special circumstance here.
My opinion is if you struck that last sentence, it would not undermine the ordinance as a whole or the rationale.
You mean the first 2 sentences? That's what I was referring to, keeping the last sentence but striking the first 2. First 3. No, I'm sorry. Sentence number 2 and sentence number 3.
Keeping sentence number 2 or striking that?
Striking them.
Special cycles.
This might be something that we want to consider sending to committee so that we can discuss it further.
You want to keep
I
the
put that
last.
out there.
You want to keep the last sentence on number 1.
The first sentence and the last sentence, and strike number 2 and 3. And like I said, we can send this to committee and we can discuss it further, but these kind of legal precedents are the issues that I have. I don't actually have concerns about the particular design of this sign.
Okay, Brandon Bowersox.
Yeah, let me just reiterate what Danielle said. I completely agree with her. I have a concern that the way it's currently written, it doesn't really spell out what's unique about this project, and it doesn't spell out why I would be willing to support an experiment here, but not open the door to this exact same type of sign being used everywhere else in town. Because the way it's currently written, the only thing unique is that, yeah, these retail buildings don't quite front the street. Well, that's not unique, in my view. When I think about where else we have buildings like that, the Tapman project at the northeast corner of 5 Points, it doesn't quite face the street. He already has his sign up, but the northwest corner at 5 Points, those don't quite face the street. The bank, the credit union at the corner does, but the retail is really off on its own. When I think about the Menards area and the plats we've seen for Menards, that's the same case where retail is facing access drives, it's facing frontage roads, it's facing other things, but it's not right on 130. And so this variance could apply there too. And all of those people on the east and west side of 130, it seems like, would have case under this to come before us and say, well, we got the same criteria, we should get the same variance. So to me, what is unique about this case, and what I'd like us to spell out more in the wording, if I'm going to vote yes for it, is partly the orientation of the buildings, especially the fact that they are along these pedestrian plazas, and that the developers have done a really quality job of planning this pedestrian internal circulation layout. And the wording right now doesn't really say the word pedestrian plaza, and it doesn't spell out what's special about this orientation, which is why this place really does need some visibility to the street. The other thing that it doesn't spell out in the criteria is the fact that in this case, the developers are asking for one sign that's 78 square feet, whereas they're allowed 4 signs, each 200 square feet. 150 for the basic sign plus 50 for a tenant directory is 200 each. So that's 4 200 square foot signs that they would be allowed under the ordinance by right. But they're coming with a significant reduction. That's less than 25%. It's 18% or something of the sign square footage that they might otherwise build. That's a significant reduction in square footage and in distraction and in visually what might be taking people's attention. And so I think it makes sense that if they're going to reduce the amount of sign by that much, that then there's a reason that we would give more leeway on rules such as timing and color. But that's unique to this. And if we don't spell that out, then anybody else who wants a multicolored sign or a 10-second sign, it seems like, would be allowed it. And so I'd like to spell out what's unique about this case so that we only have to give on these same criteria in cases where people are facing a pedestrian plaza because of the circulation structure of their quality development. In cases where people are reducing by such a great amount the total square footage of signs. So I think some of those wording pieces could go both in question 1 and in question 5 about why this isn't a nuisance to adjacent property. I think the fact that the sign square footage is so much reduced contributes to the fact that this is not a nuisance. Also the fact that it's on a corner that really doesn't face any of its immediate neighbors. The only neighbors that this sign faces are across a street, but so that means there's no residential house. There's nobody living in a home where this is shining in their window. And to me that's important too. And that should be spelled out uniquely. So those are the pieces of wording, the pedestrian plaza orientation, the total reduction of square footage of signs, which is such a great reduction, from 4 times 200 down to 178-foot sign, and the fact that it faces on a corner just across streets but not to neighboring properties. Those things, if we spell them out, would make me willing to, in this case, let this developer try this experiment. I think it is an experiment, and we'll see how this sign works. We'll see how it works in this case before we would change our ordinance and allow it everywhere else in town, because it is a little bit different. And I'm willing to give this developer, because of these unique circumstances, if we can tailor it specifically, the variance to try it out in their development. I think it's a high-quality development, and I'm so excited about it being in Urbana, and I've already eaten there and enjoyed going to places at the Pines, and I hope we see more retail there, and I hope that it all works wonderfully. So that's where I stand, and that's sort of what the word changes that it would take for me to support it.
Charlie Smythe?
Yeah, ask the petitioners here if they'd mind a little bit of a delay while we get the wording set a little more carefully so that we're comfortable that we're not setting a general precedent here. I think I agree with Danielle and Brandon that we need to, dot all the I's sort of thing. It's the camel's nose in the famous saying there that Cliff Singer was so fond of many years ago, and so I really think we need to very tightly put this together. I'd like to get some feedback from the public, but that they should know that this is one sign smaller instead of 4 that would be allowed, and it fits in with the general idea. But at the same time, I know a lot of people are not happy with the Assembly Hall. A lot of people aren't happy with the sign over by the Jerry's IGA on Kirby, and so we need to look at this very carefully and make sure that it is a very unique circumstance that we're going after. Do we need 2 weeks or 3? Our next council meeting is in 2 weeks. Our next committee meeting is in 3 weeks. This is the special meeting. Next is 5th Monday. So we send it to committee. It's 3 weeks before it goes to committee, and then 4 weeks to the next council meeting. The 7th and then the 14th. 7th would be a council meeting, so we would send this to committee on the 14th, and then We could say,
We don't have to go that
could
far.
we get it all to council in 2 weeks?
Yeah, council of
Okay,
two.
then the simplest thing is a move to defer. Either way works. Oh, yeah, sorry,
Oh.
yeah.
Now that we have the time delay kind of defined, that would be fine.
April 7th would be fine.
We just don't want it to go on for months and months. and
Yeah,
months.
no, it won't go on for months. Do we, yeah, so does
April
does
7th?
staff think we can get all this lined up in 2 weeks? Yes. Okay, I move that this be postponed to our April 7th council meeting.
Second.
Okay, motion by Mr. Smythe and seconded by Mr. Bowersox. And a question from Mr. Roberts.
I'm not interested in delaying the motion, but I did have one more question, and if we're going to be changing the topic because we're going to make a deferral, there's one other thing that I'd like to question about the criteria, and that's number 3. I read it, and it says, "The variance requested was not a result of a situation or a condition having been knowingly or deliberately created by the petitioner." And actually, the condition and the situation is specifically created by the petitioner. In other words, as Brandon Bowersox was mentioning, the decision to group the shops in an interior enclosed pedestrian-friendly shopping area and not be facing the street, it was a plan that was knowingly created. And so I'm trying to understand how number 3 can be answered sufficiently, how it could be supported, and if it seems to be questionable, is it necessary to be supported to pass this variance?
Well, I would answer that. You have to take all the evidence and weigh it and make the decision for yourself. And they've made the representations in their application, and we've done an analysis, and then in the end, you all will make the decision.
Okay, just reading that, it sounds like you have an answer for it, but I didn't feel the answer was sufficient, so I had to ask about it. Okay?
Okay, we have a motion by Mr. Smythe, seconded by Mr. Bowersox. Did you mean to include both of those ordinances? Okay, is there any further discussion? If not, all those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? Motion carries. Next is ordinance number 2008-03-019. Thank you very
Thank you
much
both.
for your presentation. An ordinance approving a major variance to allow for the construction of a mixed-use retail office building with front yard setbacks along University and Lincoln Avenues ranging from 0 to 10 feet
pass that to Mary.
in the B3 General Business and B3U General Business University zoning districts. This is not for me.
Yeah, it's good.
What's that?
Oh, right now?
Okay.
Okay. Okay, and this is properties located at 901 West University Avenue, 902 West Clark Street, and 904 West Clark Street. And, what? It's not. So we have a staff presentation, and then we have 2 people that want to discuss this. Dave Cocaine and Chris Dillion. Is that correct? Okay. Go ahead.
Hello. Hi. Tonight we're looking at a request by Vermilion Development Corporation, who is the contract purchaser of the property, for 2 variances to allow for the construction of an approximately 32,000 square foot mixed-use office retail building at the southwest corner of Lincoln and University. The property is currently owned by the University of Illinois Foundation, and it consists of 3 parcels that's bisected by an alley. In 2001, the city and the university entered into an agreement for development of this property, and it was the intent of the development to create, basically, create a significant architectural presence at this site that would serve as an improvement to University Avenue's urban character while creating a tax revenue base retail at that site. Also, the comprehensive plan recognized that this was an important site and designated as a gateway in the comprehensive plan and also as a campus mixed use. To kind of help me to go through this, I'm just going to refer to an aerial If I can have the Elmo, please. Yes. Okay, all right, I'll just go ahead. Basically, to create a fitting development at this site that has both an urban and an architectural presence, they're asking for 2 variances because of the site challenge. And I'm just going to refer to the aerial because there is an alley that bisects it and that there's major, this is just for your information, Exhibit A in your packet if you want to look at it. Because there's an alley that bisects the property and that there's actual utilities in that alley, they can't be relocated because it's cost prohibitive. They're confined to having to locate the development north of the alley. In addition, kind of why I want you to see the aerial, I have a hard time describing this, but the black outline is really where the original property line was, but because IDOT came through and took through their actual building line as the sidewalk. So they have to fit between that sidewalk and the alley for the building. So they're kind of confined for that reason. So essentially, the front yard setback allows them, when you look at the site plan, it allows them to do kind of a stepping of a building that follows that curve. And they're doing that step also to create a pedestrian feel so that there's some kind of breakup in the building as you look along there. In addition, the other thing is that although the setback ranges from 0 to 10 feet, there's really a larger apparent setback because you do have some basically parkway between the sidewalk and the road, so there still appears to be a larger setback. The second variance is for the encroachment of parking into the required front yard setback more than 10 feet. Essentially, we have 2 front yards because this is at the intersection of University and Lincoln Avenue. And I wanted to point out, by looking at the site plan, that they have provided 5 foot all the way up until you get to about the north 2 parking spaces. So the 5 foot, the encroachment more is really for these northern couple parking spaces. They have adhered to the front yard setback for the rest of the parking area. In addition, they are providing the required side yard setback to the west of the property for property that abuts essentially development to the west. And part of this, which you'll see in the next item, is that they are requesting vacation of the alley along their property, and this really helps with site circulation. It also eliminates that access basically on Lincoln and University Avenue. On Lincoln Avenue, the intersection on Lincoln Avenue, so that there's not that intersection. And they're providing that gray easement so that essentially the public can still come into the alley, turn south, and then exit out of Clark Street. So they're providing a means of still ingress, egress through that site and movement so that that's not prohibited to do that. Essentially, you kind of touched this really in the last item, that there are a number of criteria. There's a number of criteria that you review, essentially that there's not specific, that there are special circumstances or special difficulties with developing the site, that it's not a special privilege, that the situation isn't created by the petitioner, that it doesn't alter the character of the neighborhood, and that it does not cause a nuisance. Essentially, we have an unusual site. It's at a major intersection, high traffic, really a high demand for this site, which means to get that type of development there, the site is unique because of that. And the fact that it is small, the fact that the site geometry, because of IDOT taking right away, in addition to the alley, all those are special circumstances to this site. It does meet, again, setbacks where they can meet setbacks on the west where it's adjacent so that it won't be a nuisance to property to the west. And it is really consistent with, I think, the commercial nature of the rest of University Avenue. It is consistent with zoning, with a comprehensive plan, and the agreement between the university and the city. A couple weeks ago, the Zoning Board of Appeals basically made a recommendation for approval to forward to council for approval for both variances, and essentially each variance had 2 different conditions. The variance for the front yard setback, basically that the development would conform to the site plan that was submitted, and also that there would be improvements made between the face of curb and the building to landscaping. That was the conditions for the front yard setback or variance major variance 03 that you have before you. The second variance for encroachment into the 10-foot front yard setback, they, also made the condition to have that in general conformance to the site plan, as well as providing for the landscape buffer along the east and south side of the proposed parking lot as required by the variance. And that basically concludes my presentation. If anybody has any questions, and also the developer is here if you have specific questions.
Lynn Barnes.
Because of a very remote potential conflict of interest, I need to recuse myself from the discussion and vote.
Brandon, did you have your hand up first?
Yeah, I was just going to move approval of both ordinances to get a motion on the table. Including the street vacation 3 ordinances.
Okay, motion by Mr. Bowersox and seconded by Ms. Chenoweth, is that okay? Did you have a question, Charlie?
Yeah, just real quickly. So the way I understand it, we're basically, the building will go up to the existing sidewalk, and the green space will be on basically the north and northeast side of the sidewalk. Yeah, Chris can show us the pictures. Yeah, that's probably the best.
I may have him. He'll show you. You want to show the pictures?
Okay, we have Dave Cocaine from Vermillion Development and Chris Dillion from Vermillion Development in favor.
We also have our architect, Bob Finnegan, from OKW Architects, and our civil engineer, Tim Pellegrini, who can aid us in answering any technical questions that you may have.
And I will say that we have 2 individuals who filed forms saying they oppose this, but they do not wish to address the committee or the council. Neil Malone from Champaign County Association of Realtors and Max Mitchell representing himself.
I think it's a different matter.
Well, that's what they wrote on here, so these people are opposed. They're not opposed? Oh, well, then you have to write in support. If you support it, you should say in support. Well, it's for the alley vacation. Well, we'll get that straightened out, I guess. Well, they're not going to speak, so I was just going to say that was the only opposition. Okay, would you like to proceed?
Mayor, pressing members of the City Council, let me just offer a few brief introductory remarks, if I may, and then turn it over to Bob Finnegan and Tim Pellegrini to answer any technical questions that you may have about the development. First, as noted in the introduction, for many years the university and the City of Urbana have envisioned a gateway presence at this corner. As was alluded to, there was an agreement in 2001, 7 years ago, to encourage redevelopment, and it has taken some time, but I think the project that we're presenting here this evening will enable the city and the university to realize that long-held aspiration. We believe that this facility, which Bob will share with you the renderings of in a moment, will create a signature gateway for the university, for Carl, and for the community of Urbana. It is a 3-story mixed-use gateway. Obviously, it will provide a very, we think, aesthetically pleasing entryway for visitors coming south on the Lincoln Avenue corridor, as well as visitors traveling west on the University Avenue corridor. Bob, if I could ask you, could you flip to the rendering, would you mind, so that people can get a sense of what we're talking about? Thank you. As you can see, it has a very urban appeal to it, which we think will help beautify the University Avenue corridor. Of equal importance, it will complement the city's desire to see kind of an urban fabric, and of course it will add incremental property tax revenue for the various taxing bodies in the city of Urbana. So we think it represents a great public-private partnership. As Lynn Barnes alluded to, Carl is going to lease a small part of the space in this facility. I want to give credit to them for their early participation on it. They were really an early champion of it, and they will be relocating some of their operations to this facility. So we respectfully ask, given the nature of the development and the circumstances that were outlined previously, for your approval of the 2 variances as well as the alley vacation. And with that, Bob, I'll ask you to maybe say a few words.
I think the question that was earlier stated was the building location in proximity to the sidewalk. And as you can see, towards the west end of the property, we're respecting the setback to the best extent possible. And then as the the easement, which has been created by IDOT, steps back and causes this unusual geometry. We're stepping the building even further to respect that. And then in addition, easing.
So you've got the sidewalk and you've got some green space?
There's sidewalk, and then there'd be a combination of green space and some adjacent walks to access the particular tenants, yes. And then this green space that you see is actually outside the property and a result of the easement, the IDOT easement. So the building steps back and then softens the corner too with the radius element that respects the pedestrian flow around the corner of the University. Oh, I'm sorry. The sidewalk as it exists is this angular element. See, it starts to infringe on the property line immediately at the west end of the property line. So it comes down and the sidewalk runs southeast at that point, and then takes approximately a 45-degree angle, continuing even further south. And then, again, an unusual geometry, which is speaking to the setback of 3 parking spaces. It's really the IDOT easement, which has caused the unusual geometry of the site.
Dennis go
Buffer is
ahead.
created naturally.
Dennis Roberts has a question.
I've been in conversation with the owner of the Dairy Queen, which is the business that's immediately to the west. In talking with the store manager, I learned that they don't have a problem, their business does not have a problem with the alley vacation, but they do have a concern about deliveries being delivered to the back of their building. I was at the property today, and originally, coming from memory, I thought that the apartment building that is shown just west of the parking lot, I thought that was part of the property in question, and I thought that might be removed, but I see it's not. That the new access to the alley behind, service alley behind the Dairy Queen property would be coming from the south, Clark Street, or is it Park Street? Clark Street. So, in other words, on the west end of your parking lot that you're proposing, that's parallel with North and South Lincoln Avenue, there's a 21, I think it's a 21.5-foot easement for access that connects to the existing alley, which is not vacated, and that would be sufficient for a large delivery truck to negotiate. And my concern is negotiating the turn as the truck comes in from the south, apparently has the privilege of driving up that service, that easement road to make a delivery behind the next door business. And my wondering is, can a large truck make the turn left, go westbound to make the delivery? That was a concern of the property owner next to you.
Well, actually, there's 2 points of access to the alley. One to the west off Gregory Street, which remains completely unchanged at this point, and the alley width that's there. So that component of it, if the delivery were to come in and access for the Dairy Queen, could either exit or egress to Clark Street or again to University. As was mentioned earlier, it's actually somewhat of an improvement onto Lincoln Avenue because that rather dangerous access point, which is so close to the intersection, has been eliminated in favor of one to a secondary arterial, which is a more safe condition. And the 21.5 feet was coordinated with staff.
Yeah. I mean, it may be wide enough for the turn. I know that the delivery truck comes off the expressway southbound Lincoln and was accustomed to make a very easy turn into the alley. Now it needs to go back down another block or half block to Clark Street and then make 3 additional turns actually to get into the same service rather than coming directly in. Therefore, that business owner was concerned about the structure of the alley. And I know that there is a telephone pole basically at the position where that white car is parked.
Correct.
And I'm wondering if that telephone pole is going to hinder the turning of a large truck. So that's my question. Bill Gray.
Okay, Bill Gray.
Good question. We looked into this, and in fact, vehicles as large as our fire department pumper trucks can make that turn, northbound to go westbound or eastbound to go southbound. So there's plenty of room there by using a software program to simulate the moving of a vehicle. So to answer your question, it's been looked into and accommodated. So Our understanding is the trucks or service vehicles for the Dairy Queen are in the 25 or so foot long range, and that will handle that size vehicle without
You
a
said
problem.
50 feet? Is that possible, 50?
50, I would say, probably would not. A semi-truck would not be able to negotiate it. But single-unit vehicles will.
Well, his concern was that it was a very large delivery truck.
But we heard it was in the 25 to 30-foot range, and that would be fine. Semi-trucks would not make it.
Okay.
And a semi-truck, quite frankly, could park on Gregory Street to make the deliveries. That situation is common all over town, downtown, whatever. So a semi doesn't have to use that alley. Maybe they currently do it, but if it's a semi-delivery, which he may have, in this case, our recommendation would be they would have to use Gregory Street to park there south of University to make that access.
Danielle Chenoweth?
I just wanted to state my support for the project. This is in my ward, and I'm extremely pleased to see the U of I choose this property for private development because it's a corner property with great traffic counts, and it didn't make a lot of sense being, you know, kind of another sign for the U of I. I was really hoping it would be something that was more usable to the public in terms of offering retail, et cetera. So this is an extremely handsome project, and I think you did a great job.
Heather Stevenson.
This is quite a step up from the Ye Olde Donuts. I used to actually go to Ye Olde Donuts after church almost every Sunday because I go to Vineyard, so shoot down the road. Been there for a while. Congratulations to a really, really beautiful piece of art. I mean, that's just outstanding. And thanks for being in Urbana. It's kudos to you for wanting to be here, and I gladly support this.
Okay. And that was you? Oh, Brandon and Danielle. Okay, we have a motion. Any other comments or questions? This is a combined 3 ordinances. Would the clerk please call the roll?
Mr. Bowersox?
Yes.
Ms. Chenoweth?
Yes.
Mr. Lewis?
Yes.
Mr. Roberts?
Yes.
Mr. Smythe?
Yes.
Ms. Stevenson?
Yes.
That motion carries. Thank you. Next is an ordinance number 2008-03-022, revising the annual budget ordinance, and this is for the University Avenue Design Study. Hi.
I'm going to sit here this time. Essentially, back in September, we brought an ordinance revising the annual budget for match dollars. The City of Urbana, the Regional Plan Commission applied for the City of Urbana, City of Champaign, MTD, and the university for an Illinois Tomorrow Corridor planning grant for University Avenue. That was received in the amount of $162,000 with $18,000 in match, which you approved back in September. Essentially, when we met with the different parties in this, it was decided that it would be a good thing to really have an urban design component to this. So essentially, we're proposing to have CBA, who is the landscape planning firm who is doing the North Cunningham beautification study, to also do this. Since they will be here doing that, it kind of has a cost benefit, as well as being able to have some coordination in that development, since University and Cunningham intersect each other. They have a proposal before you, the scope of services that was in your packet, to complete that urban design for the cost of $26,975. CCRPC is willing to, or going to allocate $12,000 out of the grant towards that, which means that there's an additional $15,000 that's needed from the city. We're proposing to take that funding out of TIF 3, which extends across the study area. Essentially, with $162,000 coming in for the grant and $18,000 in match, the city's output between the match and the TIF 3 contribution would be $21,000, which is very good benefit to having a transportation study and an urban design for University Avenue. So we would recommend adoption of that ordinance.
Mr. Smythe.
Move approval.
I second.
Motion by Smythe, seconded by Roberts. Any other discussion? If not, would the clerk please call the roll?
Yes?
Mr. Bowersox?
Yes.
Ms. Shenoweth?
Yes.
Mr. Lewis?
Yes.
Mr. Roberts?
Yes.
Ms. Smythe? Mr. Smythe?
Yes.
Ms. Stevenson?
Okay, the motion carries. Next, we have appointments, mayoral appointments. The Human Relations Commission, I'm recommending Aisha Lam Sob and Rizwan Udin. And the Community Development Commission, Jerry Moreland.
Move approval.
Second.
Motion by Mr. Smythe, seconded by Ms. Stevenson. Any discussion? If not,
By Lynn Barnes.
Barnes.
oh, I'm sorry.
It was a
Motion by Mr. Smythe,
It was a
seconded by
female.
Ms. Barnes. If there's no further discussion, all those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, motion carries. Thank you. There being no further business, this meeting is adjourned.